You see a missing person poster and feel a pang of tragedy for the family. We see some of them, the ones with the quiet marks in the corner, and feel a cold, quiet relief, because it means the account is settled for another season. The official search is just the public-facing part of the job. The real protocol is one you will never find in any government manual. The first rule of working at the Cascade Sector Ranger Station is that the paperwork outlasts everything. It outlasts the summer tourists, the winter snows, and sometimes the people it's filed for. I finished the incident report on the illegal campsite at Whispering Falls using the precise, economical language hammered into us at the academy. Subject cited, site cleared, fire risk mitigated. Another neat, tidy entry in the grand ledger of federal land management. Across the room, Samuel Bridger was sharpening a knife with a focus that bordered on religious. The slow, rhythmic scrape of steel on whetstone was the station's metronome, a sound that grated on my nerves with its lack of urgency. Sam had been part of the park's topography for 30 years. He was less a man and more a collection of sun-bleached anecdotes and warnings that didn't appear in any official field manual. Don T. whistled past the old growth after sundown. He'd told me my first week. Bad form. I'd logged it away with his other bits of backwoods wisdom, like never trusting a clear sky in the eastern hollows or the idea that some trails get shy if you walk them with too much purpose. He finished with the knife, testing the edge on his thumb with a grim satisfaction. Sky's got a bruised look to it over Raven's Tooth, he said without looking up, his voice a low rumble of gravel. That ridge gets hungry when the clouds sit low. I glanced out the window. The sky was a placid, hazy blue. Forecast is clear through tomorrow, Sam. Just some high-altitude haze. Forecast doesn't cover everything, he murmured, sliding the blade into its worn leather sheath. His hands, gnarled and scarred, moved with an unnerving gentleness. It was the contrast that always got me, the way this man, who could probably field dress a deer in the dark, handled his tools with the care of a watchmaker. The dispatch radio crackled to life, breaking the quiet. Cascade Station, this is County SAR Dispatch. Over. I grabbed the receiver before Sam could move. This is Ranger Joshi at Cascade. Go for dispatch. My voice was crisp, professional. Standard operating procedure. The details were depressingly standard. A day hiker, Katie Pham, overdue by 3 hours. Last seen heading towards Eagle Creek Loop, a moderate trail popular with tourists who overestimated their fitness. Car was still in the parking lot. A classic scenario, the bread and butter of our work. I grabbed the SAR binder, flipping to the Eagle Creek section, my mind already mapping out grid patterns and team assignments. Right, I said, pulling the large topographical map from its roller. Let's get a team mobilized. He'll coordinate from here until you're on site. Sam stood up and walked over to the map, but not to look at it. He took the heavy wooden dowel at the bottom and with a single practice motion, rolled it all the way up until the entire park disappeared into a tight cylinder of vinyl. Then he turned the entire fixture so the blank white back faced the room. I stopped, pen hovering over my notepad. What are you doing? Map's got too many eyes, he said, his own eyes fixed on the blank surface. Don't need it looking for her. Just us. He then went to the small supply closet and came back with a pouch of what looked like rock salt, sprinkling a tiny, almost invisible line across the station's doorway. I stared, my professionalism warring with sheer disbelief. This wasn't protocol, it was theater. Sam, that's ridiculous. We need the map for coordinating the ground search. I know Eagle Creek better than I know my own face, Maya. We don't need the map for this one. He pulled on his jacket. And when we're out there, stick to the main trail. Don't cut through the aspen grove, no matter how quick it looks. And keep the chatter low near the water. It was an order disguised as advice. I wanted to argue, to quote the manual on operational planning and asset management, but the urgency of the missing hiker took precedence over correcting my partner's bizarre superstitions. I would handle this by the book, and the results would speak for themselves. And they did. 3 hours later, we found Katie Pham huddled under a rock outcropping a half-mile off the trail, a badly twisted ankle her only injury. She had tried a shortcut through the aspen grove just as Sam had warned against, and slipped on a patch of wet scree. We got her splinted, hydrated, and airlifted out before the evening chill even set in. It was a flawless execution of search and rescue protocol, a textbook win. Back at the station, the fluorescent lights hummed as I typed up the final report. Case closed, victims safe, unit performance optimal. I felt a flush of pride, the satisfying click of a complex problem solved by training and discipline. Sam was quiet, cleaning mud from his boots. When I was done, I stood up and stretched. See, the system works, by the book, and she's safe at the county hospital. He just grunted, not an admission of defeat or agreement, just a sound. He walked over to the map fixture and slowly, carefully turned it back around. He unrolled the heavy vinyl, the familiar greens and browns of the Cascade Sector filling the wall once more. As the map settled, my eyes caught a flicker of movement from his hand. He'd had a pencil, and for a split second, I saw what he'd been doing while I was on the radio. Over a deep, unlabeled section of the park, miles north of Eagle Creek, in the Badlands the old-timers called the Quiet, he had traced a faint, almost imperceptible circle, and inside it, a small, dark cross. He saw me looking, and his hand dropped. The warmth of the successful rescue evaporated, replaced by a cold I couldn't quite name. For 2 weeks, the station operated on the clean, predictable rhythm of procedure. My successful handling of the FAM case had settled into a quiet confidence that hummed under every log entry and patrol report I filed. Sam seemed to retreat further into his shell of cryptic warnings and meticulous tool maintenance, and I took it as a tacit admission that my methods had prevailed. The little cross he'd drawn on the map remained a silent, nagging question mark, but one I was content to ignore. Competence, I had proven, was a matter of training, not of tossing salt in doorways. Then came the call about Daniel Chen. On paper, it was almost a carbon copy of the last one. A young man, an avid photographer, had gone out to capture the bloom of the ghost orchid, a flower that blossoms for a single day in a notoriously rugged patch of the park. His car was found at the North Rim trailhead, just where he said it would be. He was overdue by a full day. His mother, frantic, had provided a recent photograph and a detailed itinerary. It was another tragic but entirely conventional scenario. I pulled down the North Rim topographical map, the real one, not the blank wall Sam preferred, and started outlining search sectors. A county sheriff's deputy dropped off the first stack of missing posters an hour later. The face staring out from the glossy paper was young, earnest, a slight smile on his lips. Daniel Danny Chen, age 23, last seen wearing a blue jacket and carrying a prominent camera bag. I took a handful to post at the trailheads in Visitor Center. It was a grim part of the job, but a necessary one. Public awareness was a critical asset. I was reaching for the thumbtacks when Sam's scarred hand covered mine, stopping me. His touch was surprisingly gentle, but firm as granite. "Not those," he said, his voice low. "Leave them be." I pulled my hand back, a spike of irritation rising. "Sam, this is standard procedure. We need to get his face out there." "We will," he said, his eyes not on me, but on the poster in my hand. Just not that version. He took the flyer from me and held it up to the light, angling it so the afternoon sun streamed through the paper. "Look there, bottom right corner, just above the staples." I squinted, seeing nothing but the standard print shop details. "I don't see anything." "Your eyes are too new," he said, a statement of fact, not an insult. He pulled a small, powerful magnifying glass from his desk drawer and held it over the spot. "Look again." I leaned in, and this time I saw it. Embedded in the paper fibers, so faint it was almost a part of the grain itself, was a tiny, stylized shape, a spiral, coiled like a serpent with a single dot in its center. It wasn't printed on the paper, it looked like it had been pressed into it. A watermark from a nightmare. The sight of it sent a jolt of cold through my chest, a primal wrongness I couldn't articulate. "What is that?" I whispered. "That," Sam said, putting the magnifying glass away, "is a notice. It means this isn't a search and rescue operation. It's a collection. My academy training, my manuals, my entire professional framework offered no category for what he was saying." "A collection? What are you talking about?" "We have a missing person. Our duty is to find him." "Our duty," he corrected, his gaze finally meeting mine, and I saw an exhaustion in his eyes so profound it looked like a physical weight, "is to manage the park." Sometimes that means finding people. Other times it means making sure what they found doesn't follow them back. He walked over to a locked supply cabinet and never seen him open and keyed it. The door swung open to reveal not first aid kits and emergency flares, but objects that had no place in a government facility. There were canvas bags filled with what smelled like iron dust, coils of old, discolored rope, and a series of heavy iron bells, their surfaces etched with symbols similar to the one on the poster. "The county SAR team will run their grids," he explained, his back to me as he selected a few items. "They'll comb the woods, they'll put dogs on the ground, they'll fly the helicopters. We'll even help them. It's good for the family to see the effort being made. It's the right thing to do." He turned around holding a heavy canvas satchel. But that's not the real job, not this time. The world I had so carefully constructed, one of rules, reports, and resolutions, was tilting on its axis. The mark on the map, the salt, the nonsense warnings. They weren't the ramblings of an old man, they were pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known existed. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely steady. "What is the real job?" He slung the satchel over his shoulder. "The real job is to go to the place the orchid grows, leave an offering, and close the door." He opened. "It's a protocol, Maya, just not one you'll find in the manual." He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "You can stay here. Coordinate the official search, file the reports. No one would blame you." The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I could stay in my world of paper and procedure, or I could step into his. I looked from the neat grid lines I'd drawn on the map to the impossible spiral on the poster. My primary goal had always been to prove my competence. But what was competence in a world that had secret rules and hidden doors? Staying behind felt like a failure, a willful act of ignorance more profound than any procedural mistake. "I'm coming with you," I said, the words feeling like they were pulled from me. A flicker of something, not relief, maybe just acknowledgement, passed over his face. "All right," he said, "but there are rules. You do exactly what I say. You don't touch anything I don't tell you to touch. And when we get there, if you hear something that sounds like your name, you don't answer." No matter what. We drove north for an hour, away from the manicured trails and public access roads, onto a web of old logging tracks that weren't on any official park map. The truck bounced and groaned over deep ruts. Sam hadn't spoken a word since we left the station, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The official SAR operation for Daniel Chen was in full swing miles to the south, a coordinated dance of radios and grid searches that now felt like a hollow performance. We parked where the track dissolved into a wall of impenetrable firs. Before I could even unbuckle my seatbelt, Sam turned to me, his eyes dark and serious. "We're on a different clock now," he said. "The sun goes down, the rules change. We don't speak his name, not his first, not his last. We call him the photographer. Got it?" I nodded, the word catching in my throat. "Anything you're carrying that makes a sharp, metallic sound. Keys, carabiners, wrap them in cloth or leave them here. No whistling. If you have to talk, keep it low. And if a branch falls in front of you, you walk around it. Never step over." He recited the list like a pre-flight check, each rule more nonsensical than the last. This was no longer the eccentric rambling of an old-timer, it was a catechism for survival. He led the way onto a barely there trail, a path visible only by a faint depression in the pine needles. The forest here was different. Older, the air grew heavy and still, muffling the sound of our footsteps until it felt like we were walking on felt. The usual chatter of birds and squirrels was gone, replaced by a profound, listening silence that pressed in on all sides. My training screamed at me to take note of landmarks, to check my compass, but the landscape seemed to actively resist being known, its features shifting and blending together. After an hour, we came to a small, unnaturally perfect clearing. In the center, clustered around the base of a lightning-scarred pine, was a patch of ghost orchids, their pale, spectral blooms seeming to float in the gloom. This was it, the place from the photographer's itinerary. And as I looked at the twisted pine, a cold dread washed over me. I recognized the jagged shape of the ridgeline behind it. This was the quiet, This was the place Sam had marked with a cross on the map. He didn't pause. He unslung his satchel and took out one of the heavy iron bells. Then he turned to me. "I need something of yours, something you've carried a long time, something with meaning." "What for?" I asked, my hand instinctively going to my pocket. "An offering has to have weight," he said simply. "It has to cost something." I thought of the smooth, worn disc in my pocket, my graduation coin from the academy, a symbol of the very rules and order I had built my life around. I carried it every day. It was my touchstone, my proof of competence. To give it up felt like surrendering a piece of myself. Seeing my hesitation, Sam reached into his own pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket, its surface worn smooth with time. He placed it carefully at the base of the pine. My skepticism was a dying ember, but it wasn't extinguished yet. This was still just a man in the woods, performing a ritual born of grief and isolation. I took a deep breath, pulled the coin from my pocket, and placed it next to his locket. The moment the metal touched the earth, the air grew colder. A breeze sighed through the clearing, rustling the leaves above us. But the long, distorted shadows of the trees on the ground remained perfectly still for a moment, then began to creep slowly, deliberately, against the direction of the wind. I stared, my mind fumbling for an explanation. A trick of the light, an optical illusion. There was none. Sam ignored it, his movements practiced and sure. He took a handful of iron dust from his bag and began to trace a wide circle around the orchids, the locket, and my coin. He moved with a speed that seemed unnatural for a man his age. As I watched, my foot dislodged a small stone. It tumbled a few inches and clicked to a stop. But the sound that reached my ears was not a click. It was a deep, resonant boom that echoed through the silent woods as if a boulder had been dropped into a vast canyon, the sound rolling back and forth on and on from a landscape that had no canyons to offer. My breath hitched, my heart hammered against my ribs. Every rational instinct was screaming in protest, but the evidence of my own senses was undeniable. This place was breaking the laws of physics. Then I heard it. A voice, clear as day, drifting from the dark wall of trees behind me. "Maya," it was my mother's voice. The exact, gentle, questioning tone she used when I was a child. A wave of impossible, gut-wrenching homesickness washed over me, and I turned, my own name on my lips, ready to answer. Sam's hand shot out and clamped onto my arm like a vice. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with a terror so pure it stole the air from my lungs. He shook his head once, a sharp, violent gesture. I shut my mouth, the sound dying in my throat. The voice called out again, laced with a soft, wounded confusion, and then it was gone. The silence that rushed back in was worse than the sound had been. I was no longer a ranger observing a local custom. I was a participant in something ancient and awful. I stood frozen, my professional certainty shattered into a million pieces, while Sam finished the ritual, ringing the iron bell 3 times. Its flat, dissonant toll seemed to absorb the sound rather than create it. Then he shouldered his empty bus and gestured for me to follow. We walked away without looking back, leaving my coin and his locket behind in the unnatural quiet of the clearing. The official search for Daniel Chen was called off after 72 hours. The county sheriff held a brief, somber press conference on the steps of the courthouse, citing the rugged terrain, inclement weather, and the lack of any new leads. The language was precise, clinical, and final. He was now officially classified as presumed deceased, victim of a tragic wilderness accident. Each carefully chosen word was a stone laid on the grave of the truth. Sam and I were tasked with the family briefing. It was, the park supervisor had told me over the phone, a standard part of our duties in these situations. He didn't know that Sam had coached me for an hour beforehand in the Station S quiet office, feeding me the lines I was to use. The script was a masterpiece of compassionate deception. What covered every possible angle, every contingency, every emotional question. The answers were all the same: plausible, tragic, and utterly false. We met Mrs. Chen in a small, windowless conference room at the county building. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and cheap coffee. She was a small woman, swallowed by the oversized chair she sat in, her hands clutching a worn photograph of her son. The smiling, vibrant face from the missing poster was now a relic. "We did everything we could, Mrs. Chen," I began, my voice sounding distant and hollow in my own ears. The words were Sam's, but the mouth was mine. The search teams were thorough. We covered the entire North Rim grid twice. She didn't look at me, her eyes fixed on the picture. "His camera," she whispered, her voice fragile. Danny would never have let go of his camera. It was his grandfather's. "Did you find it?" I remembered the clearing, the unnatural silence, the feeling of being watched by a vast and empty intelligence. We had found his camera bag near the orchids. Its leather was stiff and brittle, as if it had been aged a century and a day. The metal components were warped and discolored. Sam had insisted we leave it, burying it under a cairn of rocks, according to a rule I didn't dare question. "No, ma'am," I said, the lie tasting like ash. "We found no personal effects. We believe he may have fallen into one of the deeper ravines in the area. The terrain is very unforgiving." Unforgiving. The word was a sick joke. The terrain hadn't been unforgiving. It had been hungry. "He was so excited about those flowers," she said, finally looking up. Her eyes were pools of raw, bottomless grief. "He said they only grew in a place that was still. A place where things don't change. He said it felt special." I saw the iron bell in Sam's hand. I heard the echo of a falling stone that boomed like a cannon. I felt the cold dread as my mother's voice called my name from the trees. This woman's son had walked into a place where the rules of the world were broken, and he hadn't walked out. And I was sitting here in a government-issue uniform, telling her he probably just slipped. The immense, crushing weight of it pressed down on me. This was the real protocol. It wasn't about leaving offerings or ringing iron bells. It was about this moment. It was about looking into the face of a shattered family and building a wall of lies to stand between them and the abyss. We weren't just containing a place in the woods. We were containing knowledge itself. The cost was my own integrity, my own humanity, traded for a fragile, necessary peace. Sam spoke for the first time, his gravelly voice softer than he had ever heard it. "He was a good son, Mom. He was doing something he loved. There's some comfort in that." It was a hollow platitude, but it was all he had to offer. It was all we had. After the briefing, we walked back to the truck in silence. The sun was bright, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. It felt obscene. Nothing in the world should look so normal. As I got into the passenger seat, I caught my reflection in the side mirror. The face looking back was mine, but the eyes were different. They were shadowed, tired. They held a secret. And in them, for the first time, I saw the same haunted, bone-deep exhaustion I saw in Samuel Berzeras every single day. The uniform felt less like a symbol of authority and more like a costume for a part I was now condemned to play for the rest of my life. The days after the briefing were a blur of routine and paperwork that felt like a flimsy stage set. I'd file reports on campsite violations and trail maintenance, my hands moving with practiced efficiency, but my mind was elsewhere. It was in a silent clearing with shadows that moved against the wind. It was in a sterile conference room, listening to the sound of a mother's heart breaking. The neat columns and official jargon of my reports were an insult to the truth. Sleep offered no escape. It was filled with the sound of a voice that was not my mother's, calling my name from the dark. I couldn't move on. I kept rereading the official report on Daniel Chen, the sterile, fictional account of his end. The period at the final sentence felt like a lie too vast to measure. Sam watched me. He saw me staring at the map of the quiet. He saw the way I flinched when the radio crackled with static. He said nothing for a week, just observed me from across the room with those tired, knowing eyes. Finally, one evening when the station was empty and the sun had bled out behind the peaks, he stood up and grabbed a ring of old brass keys from a hook. "Come on," he said. It wasn't a question. He led me not to a supply closet, but to a heavy oak door in the back of the station I'd always assumed led to a disused storeroom. He unlocked 3 separate deadbolts, the sound of the tumblers echoing in the quiet building. The door swung inward on groaning hinges, revealing a steep, narrow set of wooden stairs descending into darkness. The air that rose up smelled of dry paper, dust, and something else, the faint metallic tang of ozone. The basement wasn't a crypt, it was an office. A meticulously organized, terribly sad office for a job that didn't exist. Gray metal filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled with a year going back to the park's founding. Rolled maps, yellowed with age, were stacked in wooden crates. A single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling cast a stark, honest light on everything. "The official archive is upstairs," Sam said, his voice low. "This is the ledger." He pulled open a drawer marked 1980, 1985 and lifted out a thick manila folder. He handed it to me. The official incident report on top detailed the disappearance of a hiker named Sarah King, lost near Bighorn Pass. The conclusion was familiar, presumed deceased, victim of exposure. But underneath the typed report was another set of pages, handwritten on brittle, yellowed paper. And on the corner of the cover sheet, pressed into the very fibers of the paper, was a tiny, coiled spiral. My breath caught. It was the same mark. Sam gestured to the cabinets. "Go on." For hours, I worked my way through the history of the park's disappearances, the ones that mattered. Each one had a public face, a clean, tragic story of misadventure, and a private one. A college student in 92, a retired couple in 78, a geologist in 64. I found the spiral mark again and again, always linked to a specific region, always with a handwritten protocol attached detailing offerings and iron dust. But there were others. A file from 1957 had a different watermark, a jagged lightning bolt shape. The attached notes were completely different. They spoke of grounding rods, of avoiding open ground during dry weather, of a sound like tearing fabric. A series of disappearances in the eastern hollows were all marked with 3 concentric circles. Their protocol was about silence, about moving without rhythm, about leaving mirrors facing outward to give it something else to look at. Another symbol, a skeletal hand, was tied to incidents near the riverbeds, with warnings about the fog and the danger of accepting gifts found on the trail. It wasn't a one thing in the woods. It was never just one thing. It was a place of territories, of cycles, of ancient and unchangeable appetites. The park wasn't a preserve for trees and animals. It was a container. We weren't rangers. We were custodians. Then I found a small, thin file from just a few weeks ago from the same week Katie Pham had twisted her ankle. The official report was a simple note on a false alarm. Reports of strange lights near Raven's Tooth that turned out to be nothing. But the file was marked with a small, dark cross. I froze, the symbol instantly familiar. It was the same one Sam had drawn on the map that first day, over the area he called the Quiet. The handwritten notes were short and chilling. Active again, luring, responds to sound, mimicry getting better, settled with broadcast silence. I looked up at Sam, who was watching me from the bottom of the stairs. "The cross on the map," I said, my voice hoarse. "Your warnings that day, the salt, rolling up the map, keeping quiet near the water that wasn't for Katie Pham." "No," he said, "that was for the neighbors. Pham just had the bad luck to get lost near a thin spot." Sometimes the accounts overlap. I leaned back against the filing cabinet, the sheer scale of it washing over me. Decades of unshareable knowledge, of silent, lonely work. A legacy of appeasement and carefully constructed lies, passed down from one ranger to the next. The weight of it felt physical, a pressure in my chest. I finally had the answers I'd been searching for, but the truth was a burden 1,000 times heavier than ignorance had ever been. A year changes things in the high country. It carves new lines into the mountainsides with rock falls and melts the snowpack into different shapes. It carved new lines into my face too. I saw them in the reflection of the station window late at night, small, faint tracks of exhaustion around my eyes that hadn't been there before. Sam was quieter now, moving through his days with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who has finally set down a heavy load. He had passed the ledger to me, not in a ceremony, but in 100 small moments, a shared look across a dispatch call, a silent nod as I chose the correct tool from the locked cabinet, a tacit approval as I sprinkled a line of salt across the station's doorway before a storm. The new kid, fresh out of the academy like I had been, didn't see any of it. His name was Miller, and he was full of the crisp, confident energy of someone who believes the world is governed by manuals. He organized the supply closets, updated the patrol logs with zealous efficiency, and talked endlessly about the new SAR drone protocols. He saw Sam as a park fixture, a relic to be respected, and he saw me as a competent, if unusually quiet, senior ranger. He was good at his job. He was exactly who I used to be. The county sheriff's deputy who dropped off the posters was new too. He handed me the stack with a professionally somber expression. "Another one," he said, shaking his head. "Lost up by the Eastern Hollows. Kid was an amateur geologist, looking for geodes." I looked down at the face on the flyer. Young, hopeful. I didn't let myself linger on it. My eyes went straight to the bottom right corner, a habit now as ingrained as checking the weather. I didn't need the magnifying glass. My eyes were old enough now. I saw it instantly, 3 faint concentric circles, pressed into the paper like a ghost fingerprint. "Right," Miller said, already pulling down the topographical map for the eastern sector. "Let's get the initial search grids plotted. We can have teams on the ground within 90 minutes if we move fast." We'll start the call list. He was a whirlwind of by-the-book competence. I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. Envy for his ignorance, maybe, or just a deep, hollow sadness for what he didn't know. The hollows weren't a place you searched, they were a place you placated. The protocol in the basement ledger for the 3 circles was specific, bizarre, and had nothing to do with grid patterns or drone surveillance. It involved mirrors and silence. I looked over at Sam. He was sitting at his desk, mending a tear in a canvas pack, his movements slow and methodical. He didn't look up. He didn't offer a single piece of advice. He just kept stitching, leaving the silence for me to fill. The choice was mine. I could send Miller out to coordinate the official, futile search. I could protect him, let him keep his belief in a world that made sense, and go into the hollows alone to do what had to be done. Or I could begin the lesson. Protecting him felt like a kindness, but I saw the deep, lonely exhaustion in Sam's eyes, the exhaustion I was beginning to recognize in my own. This knowledge was too heavy to carry alone forever. The ledger needed a successor. The park needed a custodian, not just a ranger. I walked over to Miller, who was busy highlighting routes on the map. I placed my hand over his, stopping the squeak of the marker. He looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and confusion. "Hold up," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of the basement archive. I took the poster from his desk and held it up, angling it toward the window. I pointed to the bottom corner. "Look closer." He squinted, leaning in. "I don't see anything, Ranger Joshi." "That's because your eyes are too new," I said, the words feeling foreign and ancient on my tongue. I watched his face as he stared at the blank spot on the paper. His world of neat lines and clear protocols unknowingly poised on the edge of a cliff. And I knew with a certainty that felt like a cold stone in my gut that I was about to push him over. The next time you see a missing person poster tacked to a bulletin board, you might look a little closer at the empty spaces in the corners. Maya S.'s story reminds us that some duties are never logged in an official report, and that the heaviest burdens are the ones carried in silence. The line between superstition and protocol is sometimes drawn only by those who have seen what lies beyond the tree line, and the price of keeping the peace is a knowledge that can never be shared. If you appreciate stories from the quiet, unseen corners of our world, consider following our journey here at Silent Whispers. We re-left with Maya at a difficult crossroads, and it makes you wonder, what do you believe was the more compassionate choice for her to make? To protect the new ranger's innocence? Or to initiate him into the terrible, necessary truth of his duties? Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay safe. We'll soon head east to the Hollows, where the strangest rule of all is that the only way to keep from getting lost is to give a reflection something else to look at.